Hello, and welcome back to the Audible Finish, where we discuss the week gone by in the world of wrestling. I'm your host, Dimitri Kalos, and alongside me, as always, is my esteemed co-host, Thanasi. Welcome back, Thanasi.
Salutations and peace. It's good to be back on the show.
In today's episode, we review the outcome from WWE's draft and discuss which show we think has come out for the better. We also discuss our predictions for this weekend's WWE Backlash in France, including whether we believe Jey Uso can defeat Damian Priest to become World Heavyweight Champion. If you are enjoying the podcast and have a moment, please like, share, and subscribe. On that note, Thanasi, let's dive right into it. And this week, it was all about the WWE draft. Now, we had 2 nights worth of draft picks along with social media announcements and such. What before we do an overview of everything that's happened, how did you feel about the SmackDown side of the draft?
Well, see, and it wasn't the fault of SmackDown at all, right? Because the same feelings were on Raw too. It was a little bit underwhelming, and I'll tell you why. Usually, and the draft that I think you and I remember from like the 2000s, right? Post, like during Ruthless Aggression and during the PG era, was where there was jeopardy of people swapping brands, right? Like someone would win a match during the course of the show, and that would earn their brand the right to select someone at random to join the show. And that really didn't happen that much on SmackDown, didn't really happen much on Raw either. And I don't care so much with the fact that it's picks now, right? The picks are actually good. But the thing is, they were picking people who were already on that show. So it didn't feel like there was much variation, right? Like, I mean, the first pick of the night, Bianca Belair, yes, it's good to show, she's really strong. But she was on SmackDown before and she was selected to be on SmackDown again. Furthermore, because the champions were protected, it felt like you removed that top layer of like really, really prominent stars, and everyone that was going to be announced was by default, I guess, one tier below. So that was my overall feeling from the draft on SmackDown, and that did persist onto Raw as well. What about you?
For me, the not so much the champions being retained automatically didn't bother me as much as I thought it might, just because I felt like it took away this thing that we say as fans, which is that, oh, they're going to get picked anyway because they're that brand's champions. So I didn't mind that as much, but I completely agree with you about the fact that the roster didn't differentiate all that much. So it does feel a bit unnecessary with the draft, and I think that's the thing coming out of it that is disappointing because it doesn't feel like we've had that big of a shift on either side. And with a draft is that you kind of want a draft to feel like it's shaken everything up.
Because the draft, right? And I know the idea of the draft is borrowed from other sports, right? Where rosters are often spilled in the United States, right? So you actually do have to select. But at least the draft that I grew up with was justified on screen and off screen with this is here to shake things up and keep rivalries, keep feuds fresh throughout the year. And if you're not getting people to change brands, then you're not freshening anything up at all, right? It's just creating change for the sake of change as opposed to change for the sake of progress, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I completely agree. But on that point, we might as well delve a bit deeper into it and actually examine some of the rosters that we've got for each brand to work with moving forward. And the thing that I found interesting was, and I feel like this had more weight on night two, on the Raw episode. It feels like Raw has done their part to get some like factions involved and really build up their roster. And I think, to be honest, coming out of this, the Raw side looks more desirable to me as a viewer than the SmackDown side. Um, and uh, and like just for context, like when they're getting picks like CM Punk, Drew McIntyre, Seth Rollins, Jey Uso, Gunther, and Ludwig Kaiser, obviously with Imperium, I feel like it looks well. And then they've even brought in some newcomers like a Braun Breaker that seems really engaging. They've, retained some other guys like the Creed brothers. Even like a team like New Catch Republic has gone to Raw. So it feels to me that there's a lot to be said about that side. But then you look at SmackDown, and I feel like they seem a little bit light with main event stars, especially with currently a babyface champion. You look at a guy like LA Knight, you don't foreseeably see him winning the world title off of Cody Rhodes. And then to me, I just feel like there's going to be a bit of an over reliance on the tier below main event status now for Cody Rhodes to have to beat to sort of add some value to his championship reign. So I'm just a bit worried that it seems a bit light, especially now that Roman Reigns isn't actually going to be appearing, which for a long time was the main draw for SmackDown, even when the rest of the roster seemed a bit light. So how do you feel about him?
Well, to build on the point that you're making, right? If you look at, and I've got the list up here of the wrestlers that are taken from Raw to SmackDown. So these would be considered the SmackDown gains. You've got Andrade, but he's relatively recent. And yes, he's got time, but it doesn't really feel like a massive steal because he didn't even have a long stint on Raw anyway. The Damage Control have gone to Raw, but of course that's in the women's division, so there's not someone to go up against Cody. SmackDown lost to the Latino World Order, so that was another gain. I guess Rey Mysterio could do something there, but it's a SmackDown loss. Furthermore, continuing on with this point, Shinsuke Nakamura could be someone for Cody Rhodes now with the title, but they had their feud earlier in the year, so there's not much there. Chelsea Green and Piper Niven again in the women's division. Likewise with Candice LeRae and Indy Hartwell. You've got DIY as well. Then you've got in the singles division, you've got Giovanni Vinci and Apollo Crews moving from Raw to SmackDown. And neither of them, I would say, are quite at the level of facing Cody for the World Championship. So essentially, you're dealing with people who were already on SmackDown anyway. Think people like Randy Orton. Think people like you said, LA Knight, AJ Styles, who he's got, of course, Kevin Owens, potentially Solo at some point down the track. But it does feel a little bit light in the main event scene. And this is something that SmackDown was suffering from in the last 3 to 6 months when Roman was off TV. Like Jimmy Uso and Solo would have to jump into the main event of SmackDown television to proxy in for Roman Reigns because they were already in the bloodline, the most prominent heel entity, but it didn't really feel like they were quite at that main event status. So looking at the list, it does kind of look as if Raw is better off.
Yeah, and that's my problem. And I'll add in this extra thing. We look at a name like Carmelo Hayes getting called up to SmackDown. That actually is a very interesting trade to me. But the problem there is he's already wrestled the champ and lost. They wasted that on the first night when they could have really, instead of feeding him to Cody Rhodes just to be like a look at him go up against the big boys, I think they should have given him more of the Bron Breakker treatment, which is not necessarily just quick squashes, but give him wins, build up some momentum for him, and have him. Honestly, for me, this is putting too much foresight into things, but have Carmelo Hayes beat LA Knight down the road for the US Championship or something, and but like keep that momentum going rather than have him suffer an early loss just to be like, oh look, but he can hang with Cody Rhodes, because obviously that's what they're trying to get at. But yeah, so with SmackDown, I'd say the men's side looks light. However, I look at their women's division and I think they're probably stronger than Raw right now.
I think I'm genuinely inclined to agree with you because the fact that they made Bianca Belair the number one pick overall was already a statement in and of itself. But they also have what I think is the most prominent steal, which is Nia Jax leaving Raw to go to SmackDown. Not to say that she's going to become a champion, and not that I want to see her as champion, but she is someone who's a made heel, who's doing the best work of her career. So I think that one actually is very, very prominent on the women's side for SmackDown. Take also into account the fact that Jade Cargill's still going to be around, so there's still lots of fresh names for that SmackDown women's division to thrive. even though that they've had the loss of Damage Control, who have gone over to Raw, which I think is the inverse, right? I think that's the one where the Raw women's roster actually had probably the biggest gain in the full Damage Control faction.
Yeah, I have to say that was one of my favorite trades because one, it completely separates Bailey away from Damage Control. Damage Control also was wreaking havoc on the SmackDown roster. Now they're completely separated. And this having happened, I'm actually excited at the prospect that maybe Io Sky might rise up to the Women's World Championship. I feel like that isn't a distant possibility, especially having her pair up against Becky Lynch. We don't know how long Becky Lynch is going to be champion for. We don't know who she's going to drop it to. But I like the idea of Damage Control, Bailey less Damage Control, being able to be on Raw away. And I think that's going to be a good trade to help elevate the women's side on Raw because without Rhea Ripley, they are kind of lacking a little bit and they need that extra power. And I think that provides it.
Question for you. How did you feel about the NXT call-ups? We've got Carmelo Hayes going to SmackDown, Kiana James going to Raw, Baron Corbin returning to the main roster to go to SmackDown. You've got Ilya Dragunov, of course, being called up to Raw, Lyra Valkyria, Blair Davenport going to SmackDown, and Dominic Dijakovic, or just Dijak now, going to Raw as well. What do these names kind of like say to you?
Well, look, I don't watch NXT religiously, but I will say that for the little that I have seen of Ilya Dragunov, I really like. So I think he's a good name for Raw. The bit of Carmelo Hayes that I've seen, I like, and I'm excited to see him on a more regular basis on the main event programming. Lyra Valkyria, I haven't seen much of her, but I'm definitely willing to give her the benefit of the doubt. I think for me, that's what it is that with the NXT call-ups, there's not a single one of them that I'm like, oh, they're going to add nothing to the show. Like with all of them, I can see what they could add. Even with a name like Dijak, all I've heard is, that he's become a bit of an actual character in his time back in NXT rather than just being this brute. He's actually added a bit more to his game. So I'm excited to see what they can maybe offer for the main roster. And I think honestly that's where the draft had its most appeal this year.
See, I'm gonna put it a little bit differently, and there's no good, there's no bad. It's just kind of a reflection here. NXT since the pandemic has largely felt a lot more like developmental. So when you're calling these guys up, with Carmelo Hayes and with Ilya Dragunov, I would probably put it slightly differently because I think they are more prominent. They've had goes around like some main roster presence as well, but it doesn't feel the same way that it felt in 2016 when Stephanie McMahon and Mick Foley selected in round one to have Finn Balor, the franchise, come to the main roster, right? It felt massive when they did that. And I mean this in the most complimentary way possible. Because Carmelo Hayes was already seen on SmackDown before he got his call up in this round one pick, it didn't feel quite the same. And of course, he's not the franchise in the same way that Finn Balor was the franchise. And the environment that he was in, NXT white and gold now, is not the same as NXT black and gold used to be. So these did feel a little bit more like vertical movements as opposed to the lateral movements that we were trying to transition to in that 2016 to 2019 black and gold like golden age for NXT, right? Like at that point, we were making the argument of like, yeah, NXT really is the third brand. Here, as much as we want to sell that, it doesn't feel that way because NXT has become a very good, in fact, I go so far as to say an excellent developmental facility, but a developmental facility nonetheless.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of merit to put on what you just said, and it is a bit of a struggle with NXT right now. It honestly, you look at a name like Bron Breakker, and I think he's probably the closest you could have gotten to that, oh my God, Finn Balor type trade. But the problem there is he had already technically signed a contract on the main roster before the draft. So you kind of lost all that appeal. So I'm actually with you on that. And I think that with NXT, I think when it's the right person, you can capture that feeling. But in these cases, it didn't feel so much like that moment. It felt more like okay, they're getting called up. I think that's the thing is there was a time when the NXT movement to the main roster, it felt more like like you said, a lateral movement. And now it feels very much like okay, now let's see if you can hang with the big boys type attitude. But yeah, look, I'm still hopeful to see what can happen there. And I'm coming out of the draft, I'd say I don't feel especially stronger about either show. However, I do feel that it sort of has continued the status quo. So I looked at Raw and said they, as a top men's division for the world title, they have more interesting possibilities. And after the draft, I feel the exact same. I looked at SmackDown and felt their women's division was stronger than Raw's. I still feel that way. And I feel with the tag division, just to put a bit of spotlight on that, I feel like the tag division has actually changed for the better on each side. Because I think we're starting to see a bit of repetitiveness. And now I think giving Raw the New Catch Republic, giving SmackDown DIY, I'm very excited about that. I think that could prove very fruitful for them. I think I think that's where things could be a bit more interesting if things work out, or it could just go back to just being exactly as before. I don't know. Did you have any thoughts on the tag division?
Look, I think the big move for me, the one that struck out to me was the fact that DIY have now switched brands, just because I think that they are a prominent tag team, but like largely consistent with the rest of the divisions. I mean, even across the across both shows, at least the televised picks, of which there were 40, I think there were only 11 instances of main roster talent switching brands. And then in addition to those, there were the five, I think, NXT call-ups, right? So you've got 16 changes of scenery out of an overall 40 people who were announced, who were selected. So that part of it felt a bit of a letdown. But changing gears, did you want to discuss any specific segments? Because I've got some views.
Well, I mean, we could go into our backlash predictions.
Before that, can we talk about someone who's not going to be on Backlash, but I wish was ready to compete? CM Punk.
Okay, well, yes, we can. I've always got time for CM Punk. Um, and honestly, it's funny that you mentioned that. For me, that was the standout segment of the whole draft uh saga of those two episodes of TV. And I have to say that he really is the best guy on the microphone.
Did you
I
find it interesting that he was making so many allusions to past promos? It says, do I have your attention now? And then I'm best on commentary, best at
No,
everything.
no, it doesn't surprise me because honestly, in this little quick run that he's so far had with WWE since coming back, he has done that. And I think the problem is with him, I feel like he's trying not to bring out too much new material while he's still out of it, while he's still out of action.
Yeah.
So I think that he's doing his version of the it's great to be in insert town name, which for him is just going back to his old hits while he's waiting to recover. And then I think when he's actually able to compete in the ring again, he's going to start coming up with some good stuff. Because even when in the lead up to the Royal Rumble, he was having some great segments with Cody Rhodes, with Seth Rollins, and then afterwards, with Drew McIntyre as well. That was bringing out some other material, and I think now is just doing that just to sort of get things rolling. But I have to say as well, I know you're probably going to talk about the segment, but I want to just quickly mention that Drew McIntyre looked very, very stunning in that shot they had of him when he was up in the box section that Punk was at beforehand. And just the shot on him, it's like his skin was very clear. Obviously, whoever's doing his makeup is doing a fantastic job. And it just the hair behind the eyes were popping out. I was just like, oh man, he looks beautiful right now. Did you feel that way as well, or am I just a bit reading too much into it?
Well, maybe the podcast is going to get very homoerotic here because when he was walking down the backstage hallway in the upstairs, looking for Punk before he went into the skybox, I just looked at him walking, and it was like without his wrist straps, his arms look phenomenal. Like he's in great shape. Just like
Yeah,
when he's got that small sort of like that sleeveless vest sort of deal, and he's walking down without the wrist straps, free arms. The bloke looks fantastic, and
yeah,
he's injured right now. So imagine when he's ready to compete properly. But specifically during that shot, during that camera work, we've seen WWE shifting a little bit more to a long sort of panning shot, or I don't know what the name of it is cinematically, but it's the one where they follow the subject of the image. And I found that really, really enjoyable because it really does break up the traditional Kevin Dunn sort of like half a second here, and then you switch to a different camera angle, and then like the chop and change constantly.
mm,
And having him just like pick up that signed autograph, that signed picture that CM Punk left for him as a gift, throw it back down, and then we still have that view into the crowd. And as CM Punk's graphic appears and his music comes on, and then we see Drew McIntyre become no longer the focus, no longer the subject, but up in the background in the rafters. I just thought that was really good positioning, like really good camera work. I think that they've become a lot more advanced, and I'm enjoying that aspect of the production that they're doing.
yeah, and I completely agree. And for me, I remember I had a bit of a critique a couple weeks ago when there was the one shot, if that's the right term, where it was Jey Uso walking out of the arena, and then it follows to Sami Zayn, and like it's one complete shot. And my issue then was just there's no reason Jey Uso would need to leave that way, and it just seemed out of convenience that was the right place to be in because Sami happened to be that way as well. But this week, it's like in terms of in in-house logic and out of the realm of wrestling, everything they did made sense. Drew McIntyre went to where he wanted to see Punk. When Punk wasn't there, then Punk's music played, and that's the moment it changed. Like everything made sense. So I feel like I do agree with you. The production is it's not so much that it's elevating, it's adapting. And I think after so many years of the same thing, it's nice to see it evolve.
Exactly. I think that's what it is. We're seeing some evolution in the production value. And I'm finding it really enjoyable to watch. I find actually enjoyable because it's refreshing,
Yes, exactly.
right? That's what it is. It's refreshing.
Yeah, no,
I'm
completely
still
agree.
I'm still holding out though for them to borrow from cricket and use the spider cam. I think the spider cam shot in professional wrestling is underrated, underused, and underappreciated. So I want them to use that a lot more.
Yes, because according to you, everyone wants it. The American
Everyone
people
loves the
want it.
spider cam.
Yeah, no, it'll be yeah, I'd be curious to see it. And that sort of wraps up. I felt like just quick thoughts as well. I felt like the Raw side was better than SmackDown this week, which I know that we're not usually in the business of trying to compare the two shows, but I felt like in the context of a draft show, Raw had more going on in it outside of the draft than SmackDown did, or at least more interesting things going on in during its draft heavy episode. Like, was that just me, or what do you think?
The way that I was thinking about it was more, I was trying to reflect on the fact that, hey, like this is the Raw go home show before Backlash. So maybe that's why they put more effort into it. Whereas with SmackDown, they're going to have people flying out, in like 7 days post the show to tape another SmackDown as the go home for Backlash. So maybe that's where that's coming from. Um, that being said, it does feel like we're leading our way towards a glorified house show. It doesn't feel like they're putting a whole lot of effort, a lot of build into the card. I think that the freshest sort of um, storyline that's coming into it, where you can predict the outcome, but there's going to be some storyline progression here, is the Kevin Owens and Randy Orton versus the Bloodline. And I know we're going to go through it when we look at the card later, but all the other results feel either very predictable as to who's going to win, or it doesn't really matter who is going to win. Whereas with this specific one, I do think that there's a lot more potential there, and it's probably because it's only at the beginning of this feud and it's going to be a little bit more extended, I suppose. I think they've got more flexibility with what they can do with it. So I think that as a result of that, all the build going into it, and mind you, they've only announced 5 matches anyway. So they spent the whole SmackDown and Raw just doing drafts, right? As opposed to building towards the pay-per-view. Even the main event was a 6-man tag, and it just felt like a house showy kind of match. So yeah, I'm a little bit not feeling the Backlash build, to be frank.
Well, on that point, let's completely get into Backlash then and get through with our predictions. So, Thanasi, this weekend is obviously Backlash in Lyon, France, and we have 5 matches on for this card, which seems a bit light, but it is what it is, and that's what we've got to work with. So, without further ado, let's get right into it and start with our predictions on the first match that I've included, which honestly will probably be the main event, and that is Cody Rhodes versus AJ Styles for the undisputed WWE Championship. Now, for me, this feels like the easiest match to predict, to be perfectly honest, just because he's just won the title. There's no way that Cody Rhodes drops it this soon, especially to AJ Styles, who in this phase of his career and build, it wouldn't elevate him any further than what it could, but the victory over him could elevate his opponent. So for me, it's very clear that Cody Rhodes wins this. How about you?
I 100% agree with you. I mean, it felt like this whole time that they were selecting a challenger who would be a good person to put Cody over, right? And AJ Styles is that reliable veteran who can wrestle, who can cop a loss, and it doesn't really affect his momentum or his standing as a professional wrestler. If, for example, they had given LA Knight the #1 contendership and then gotten him to lose, it would have stunted his momentum completely. So this was 100% the right booking call. AJ Styles once again is going to be putting over a world champion to kind of legitimize their reign, as he did last year when we were overseas, when he did so at in Saudi Arabia for Seth Rollins in the tournament final, and as he did in 2016 when he had recently begun post WrestleMania, I think it was. He had that feud with Roman Reigns and went for 2 or 3 matches. So reliably, AJ Styles is going to be the one to look at the lights so that Cody Rhodes can get his big babyface victory.
On to the second match of Backlash that we're predicting, and that is Bayley versus Naomi versus Tiffany Stratton in a triple threat for the WWE Women's Championship. Now, for me, again, this is actually quite simple. I think with Bayley, she's recently won the title. I think given it's a triple threat as well, there's no reason in this particular case to have her drop the title to either competitor. However, that doesn't not mean I don't want to see either of them win the title sometime down the line, especially Tiffany Stratton, who I think is really showcasing her talent on the SmackDown brand. But that being said, I think this is one of those cases where it should be a good match, and it could be a good platform for the other 2 wrestlers to show off their abilities. But at the end of the day, champion's probably going to retain here. I've got Bayley going out on top. What about you, Thanasi?
Well, see, my view is that these sorts of glorified house shows often don't have title changes. So I'm not going to predict Bayley to lose the title. In fact, it's her first pay-per-view defense since becoming the champion. So even though she is going up against Naomi, former world champion, going up against Tiffany Stratton, future world champion, I have to go with Bayley on this one. And I think it was a pretty good decision for them to include Tiffany Stratton on this, because it just gives her a bit of an elevated platform to show her stuff. I don't see her winning the title here, but I do see her quite shortly down the track potentially being Queen of the Ring, a Miss Money in the Bank, some sort of a prominent jump up to get to that, let's call it the pre-main event level, just to kind of to strap a rocket to her further down the line, but with a good, strong showing, probably with Naomi copping the pin on this one. Bailey, I think, is going to be the victor.
And just very briefly, I want to say that I feel like it's very commendable on Tiffany Stratton's part that it already feels like she's nearly there. Like it feels like she's only a step or two away from really being a legitimate top star in the women's division of WWE. So just, credit to her. But
Yep.
talking about some of the other stars of the women's division in WWE, in our next match, we have the Kabuki Warriors versus Bianca Belair and Jade Cargill in a tag team match for the WWE Women's Tag Team Championship. And for me, this is where I think the house show rule isn't is not going to be in effect because I think we're going to see a title change here. I think Bianca and Jade are going to get it and keep very strong. What do you think?
Well, they Bianca Belair and Jade Cargill, they got a very big 6-woman victory at WrestleMania, and it does seem like they've got all the momentum on their side. And they made a big deal. I think it was on social media they must have released that the Kabuki Warriors are allowed to defend their title across both shows as the women's tag team champions. But when they lose them, inevitably, that's when they will be exclusive to their selected brand, in this case, Raw. I'm going to make the bold prediction and say that this is going to be the one pay-per-view title change for this one. I actually think that Bianca Belair and Jade Cargill are going to get the championships, and they're going to be the first ones to win the women's world titles overseas.
And I think as well, the thing that could help in that case is with Raw's women's division seeming a little bit light, having someone of the star power of Bianca Belair being able to just be on the show as well, I think could really help with the programming there with 3 hours to fill. So I think that could also be like a quick short-term fix while we wait for people like Rhea Ripley to recover. But moving on to the fourth match of the night, we've got Kevin Owens and Randy Orton versus the Bloodline, Solo Sikoa and Tama Tonga. And this one is a really hard one for me to predict, but I feel that right now the fresh tag team of Solo Sikoa and Tama Tonga probably can do with this win more than Kevin Owens and Randy Orton, especially since Kevin and Randy are not trying to act like they are a tag team. They're more of like just allies at this current
Alliance.
moment.
Yeah.
And I think for that reason, I think Solo and Tama Tonga are going to get the win here. And it could be a really good victory for their current credibility as well. Tama Tonga is obviously a recent signing for WWE. Solo Sikoa has sort of been made to, take the fall a lot of times, especially when under Roman's leadership. So I think this could be really good for them if they get the win here. What do you think?
Look, I'm going to 100% say the Bloodline's going to win. I'm going to go so far as to speculate, maybe not predict, but certainly speculate on the method that they're going to use. I think they're going to use the time and tested method of you bash beyond, like, within an inch of their life, one of the two tag partners backstage so that it becomes an effective handicap match. Probably at somewhere through the match, the beaten up member is going to make that kind of babyface run to the ring, tag in, and give it a real hot tag to try to come back, but nevertheless still succumb to the heels. And I think that given that Kevin Owens has been on the receiving end of some attacks by this new bloodline, specifically by the henchman Tama Tonga, that he's the one that's going to get smacked around backstage during the beginning of the Backlash show, maybe on SmackDown, maybe on the go home, who knows? And then he's going to have a run out while Randy Orton is trying to fight it out by himself. So overall, definitely going to go with the Bloodline as the victors on this one. I can't go past them.
And on that note, that takes us to the final match for us to predict. And this might not be the main event of Backlash, but it's certainly a high profile match for the show. And that is Damian Priest versus Jey Uso for the World Heavyweight Championship. Thanasi, before I give my thoughts, I'm going to throw it to you. How do you see this one playing out?
Jey Uso is well and truly cementing himself in the main event of the main roster scene. However, in spite of the fact that he is making those jumps, trying to prove that he can hang in the singles division after that slightly disappointing outing, I would say, at WrestleMania against his brother, I would say that we'll have to go with Damian Priest as the victor here. Like he's just won the title. He's really trying to cement himself as a credible world champion, and the only way you can do that is by amassing wins. I don't see this one being, like the first ever world heavyweight title change on French soil overseas, because we've already gotten something similar like that when it was crowned in Saudi Arabia, I think it was. So no, I don't see Jey Uso taking the belt on this occasion. But if he puts in a good showing and it's up to both of them to try to dance with each other well, we could see something very impressive.
Against my better judgment, pardon the pun, I'm going to back our boy Jey Uso to win here. I think there's no logic to why I think that. This is a pure vibes prediction, but a main event Jey Uso is one of the most entertaining acts in WWE right now. The fans are completely engaged with everything he does. He's found his own charisma as a single star. And there comes a time in every wrestler's career where they get the just rewards for what they're able to accomplish with the fan interaction. So just even though I don't actually think with my head that he's going to win here, with my heart, I'm going to back Jey Uso. And that's going to be the one difference in our predictions, Thanasi. So really, it's all on this match to decide who's going to come out the winner of our little predictions battle.
And I'll tell you what, it may even open the show. So we'll have a known predictions winner after the first match.
And if nothing else, at least then afterwards we can just enjoy the show, not worry about trying to best the other. We already know what's happened.
Well, here it's going to be on at what, like 4 a.m., 3 a.m.? What time's it going to start? It's going to be like an ungodly hour.
I don't even know. Actually, in the comments, let us know where you're going to be watching Backlash and let us know what time you have to get up or to watch it as well. I think that could be an interesting thing. So if you are listening and you are planning to watch Backlash, let us know when and where and what time you're gonna have to watch it. And while you're down there, let us know your thoughts on who's gonna win at Backlash, what your predictions are, and if we have made predictions similar to yours, or if we've gone completely against the grain. Let us know in the comments below. Well, Thanasi, that brings us to the end of this week's edition of the Audible Finish. Next week, we will be reviewing WWE Backlash, so we'll know exactly what's happened and we can give our thoughts on all the outcomes that have come out of it. Thanasi, great to have your company as always.
Praise be to Krishna, as Dr. John Dorian would say.
And thank you to everyone for tuning in. Until next time, we hope everything you do is just too sweet.